All right, so we're almost to the end here. Now we have to just wire up our dashboard and this form and modal dialog to our endpoints, and we should be able to finish off this application in this video. So let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to add a modal dialog that allows us to add stocks to the database. So we're going to go back to our semantic UI page and search for modal on this page, and you'll see this shows us how to create a modal dialog. So if I run this code, you'll see it presents us with this modal dialog. So we're going to use that. And then instead of this stuff, we're going to put a text area inside and let the user enter symbols inside of that text area. So if we view the code here, you see it gives us this little snippet for a modal dialog, and we'll paste that into our template. So I'm going to go into our templates directory, and we'll go into the home page. And at the bottom here, we're just going to go ahead and put in, inside of our block, we're going to put in this modal dialog. And I'm going to indent this properly, and we're going to modify it a little bit. So let's go ahead and wipe out this header. We'll just replace it and call this add stock symbol. And then this isn't an image, it's just content. So I'm going to remove the image class. I'm going to remove this image. Actually, we can remove this whole thing. We just really need to provide the content of this modal dialog, which is going to be a text area. So if we go back to React, or go back to semantic UI, if we look up the form components, you can see under collections, we have form, and then let's see, text area. So there's nothing, you can use plain text areas. I'm just using these ones because they're a little bit styled already. So I'm going to copy this text area here, paste that in, and you'll see we have a text area. And then I'm just going to call this, we have two text areas here. I'm just going to erase one of these. So we have content, and we have a form UI component. We have a text area, and then I'm going to just say enter stock symbols. That's the label here. We don't need two buttons. So under our actions, we're just going to say add symbols, and I'm going to say plus icon. All right, so that'll be our modal dialog, and we'll see what this looks like in a second. Let's wire up a button to actually trigger opening this modal dialog. So I'm going to get a button component as well. And so I'm going to search for button, and as we did earlier, we can just copy this button here. So it's just button class equals UI button. And at the top of our screen here, we can just put a div here, and then let's just put a button here, and we're going to call that button add stocks, right? All right, and then so this button, what we want to do is have some JavaScript so that when you click this button, it opens this modal dialog. So to do that, you'll notice in the modal dialog section, we have this little snippet of jQuery code here that does UI.modal, and it shows the modal dialog. So I'm going to copy that code. At the very top here in block content, we're just going to do some inline JavaScript here. In a real application, you probably create a separate JavaScript file and modularize it a little bit more. I'm just going to put it inline here. And so with jQuery, we do document.ready. And so we just specify some JavaScript code that runs after the document, the HTML document loads. And so anything that runs inside of here, inside of this function body, is going to be code that executes after the document loads. And so we need to run this UI.modal, and then we're going to do modal show. All right, so we're going to say when the document loads, show the modal. So let's see if we can show it. So I'm going to refresh the page, and you'll notice it automatically opened this modal dialog, and it looks like we expect. We have add stock symbol as a header, and we have this nice text area, and we're just going to let it enter them one by one. And so we enter one by one and click add symbols, and it closes. But this didn't really do anything yet. It's not making any HTTP requests. And it's also opening whenever we load the page. We don't want that. We want it to only open when we click the Add Stocks button. So let's go to the Add Stocks button, and let's give it an ID. And we're going to call this button add_stocks. And then in jQuery, we can say, we can select that by doing pound add stocks. So we're going to select that button with the selector, and then say when we click it, we're going to run a function. And inside of that function, we'll put this UI modal show. We'll do that. And then I'm going to run it. You see the modal doesn't open, and I click add stocks, and then it does open. So that works like we expect. All right. So what do we do now? Let's have it so that whenever you click this Add Symbols button, it closes the modal dialog and submits these stock symbols to our backend with an AJAX request. So let's do that now. So this Add Symbols here, let me indent this so we can see how it looks a little bit better. Let's do an on-click. So let's say this has an ID equal to save. So this will be our save that actually triggers. And then we'll do a selector for the save. And then we'll say when you click that, we're going to run another function. And this function is going to make our AJAX request. And so what we'll do is say text area. So we have a text area. And then this text area has our stock symbols in it. So we'll give that an ID so we can reference it. And so we'll say stock underscore symbols. Or actually, we'll just call it symbols. So this text area has our symbols. And then in our JavaScript, we'll get a reference to the symbols. So we'll do var symbols. And I'm just using JavaScript 5 here, not ES6. Since we're not doing React or anything, we're just going to do bare bones JavaScript. So var symbols equals, and then we're going to do the reference to symbols, and then we're just going to get the dot value. So dot val, and that'll get us the symbols. So I'm going to log it to the console real quick so you see what that looks like. So if I go view developer JavaScript console and we refresh the page, I'm going to click add stocks and I'm going to do Apple, J&J, MSFT, click it, and you see how it displayed all of our stock symbols there. So one on each line, which is what we want. And we're going to want these symbols to go in an array because I'm going to make one call, and rather than submit a batch of symbols, we could make an endpoint that accepts a batch of symbols. I'm just going to call the same endpoint to add them one at a time. And so I'm going to loop through an array. So I'm going to build an array out of this by splitting on the new lines in the text area. So we have a string of symbols with new lines. And so I'm going to say var stock symbols equals symbols dot split. And I'm going to split on the new line character, which is \n. And then what we can do is loop through each of these symbols. So we can do var I equals 0. I is less than symbols.length. Sorry, stock symbols.length, right? And then we can do ++ I. And then let's log each. So I'm going to log what stock symbols looks like so you can see this is an array. So stock symbols. Right, and then I'm also going to log each of these line by line. So I'm going to do stock symbols I, right? And if I run that again, you can see I can do add stocks, J&J, MSFT, GE. And if I run that, you'll see when we split on the new lines, we get this array of stocks, and then I can loop through them one by one. All right, so now that we have the ability to get a stock symbol at a time, and we have an API endpoint that accepts a single stock symbol inside of a JSON payload, let's go ahead and make a request to that endpoint. So I'm going to use jQuery again, and I'm just going to do an AJAX request that accepts this object that specifies what our request looks like. We need a URL, so I'll do /stock because that's our stock endpoint, and I'm going to do type of post since it's a post endpoint, and I'm going to say content type of application JSON, and then we'll also do data, and we're going to give it our data payload, which is the stock symbol. So I'm going to do json.stringify, and then it accepts a symbol, and the symbol in this loop is going to be stock symbols I. So it's going to go, make a post for J&J, make a post for Microsoft, and so forth. So it's going to make a post for each one. And then there's also this data type parameter of JSON. And feel free to use another way of making HTTP requests. There's HTML5 fetch, which is built in. So you can use that. You can use Axios. There's a number of ways that are easier, or you may like them better than this format here. I'm just using jQuery since we happen to be using it on this application. So we're posting JSON to an endpoint, and we're posting each symbol line by line. And then what we're also going to do is once we loop through all the symbols, we can go ahead and close the modal dialog. So I'm going to go outside of this for loop, and I'm going to say UI.UI.modal. And I'll do modal. We showed it up here, we're going to actually hide it. So once we submit the form, we can hide the modal and let it finish making these post requests. So let's do that and see what happens. So let's see if that will work the first time. So I'm going to click Add Stocks, and let me see what stocks we already have in the database. Select star from stocks. So we have Amazon, Procter & Gamble. So I'm going to try Microsoft, Johnson & Johnson, and let's say Apple, and I'm going to click Add. And hopefully we see some network requests go through here. So I'm going to open the network request tab, and you see it requested stock, and we got a success. And if we look at the headers here, you can see it sent symbol as JSON, Microsoft, then it sent Johnson & Johnson, and then it sent Apple stock. And if I look in my database, let's see, star from stocks, you see we have a populated database that has a bunch of key statistics. So we made 3 API requests by entering them into a text area in a modal dialog, and we made AJAX requests, and it hit our endpoint. It inserted database records, it launched background tasks to fetch key statistics from Yahoo Finance, and those are in our database. So that's awesome. So now that that's done, the last thing we have to do to finish off this application is have all that data show up in this table and have these filters above here filter that data, and so that we can complete our stock screener. So let's do that. So to do that, let's go back to the logic in our main.py here, and we're going to need to fill out this dashboard function and do some database fetching. So let's see, how should we do that? So at the very beginning, we're going to want to show, when we first load the dashboard, we want to load all of the stocks in the database. So to load all the stocks in the database, we're just going to do a regular database query. So let's use SQL Alchemy to do that. So we'll do db. Oh yeah, so we need the database, right? So the same way earlier we did this db and we had a dependency on the database, we're going to add that dependency to our home page. So I'm going to do a comma here and then add this dependency, and I'm just copying this right here. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to put this in our function. So we should have a database reference, and I'm going to want to do db.query stock, and then I should be able to do just all there, and I'll just get all the stock records from the database. And then in our dictionary, the values that we pass back with the context here, we're passing the request. So now we can pass stocks. And so I'm going to say stocks equals db query, and then pass it a reference to the stocks. And so let's see what happens. So now that we have those stocks, I'm just going to print it to make sure we get some objects, and I'm going to refresh this page. And you'll see we have this list of models. We have a list of stock objects, and there's 5 of them. So it's probably working as we expect. So now that we're passing those back to the template, we'll go back to our home here. And then in our table, right, instead of these records, let's only do 1 row, and we're going to repeat this row multiple times. So I'm going to do for stock in stocks. So we're looping through the stocks using the Jinja 2 template syntax. And then we're going to end the for loop. And for each one, we don't need these labels because we copied those earlier. And so we're going to substitute this with database data. So we're going to have a stock.symbol. And then what else did we have? Stock.forwardPE. And then we have a stock.dividend yield, for instance. All right. And if we do that, refresh it, you can see we have real data that came from the database. And we're displaying it here, and we have no dividend yield for Amazon, and all these numbers look right. We have Microsoft, Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson. So those all have a dividend yield. That sounds good. And just to be sure this works, let's go ahead and add a couple more stock records. Let's say we do Altria Group and Corning, and I click add. I don't have it automatically refresh the page yet, so I'm going to click enter again and have it refresh. And you see we get those stocks as well. So Altria, we have this a PE of 8, high dividend right now, and then same with Corning. So you can see we're successfully using a web application in order to populate this database and fetch data about each of those stocks. So our add is working, and then we're going to need to add a few more columns here corresponding to all of the fields we're actually storing, because we want to show all of the information here. So let's go back to our models here, and let's go ahead and show all of this stuff. So I'm going to copy this for reference just so I have the names of the fields. So I have we have the symbol, we have the PE, we have the dividend. I'm going to show the 200-day, and then I'm going to show the 50-day, and then I'm going to show forward PE, and I'm going to do price and forward EPS. So I'm going to do price, and then I'm going to do forward EPS. All right, so I think that's all the fields we need. And then I'm going to display the variables below. So I have the symbol. So I'm also going to copy a couple things here. And then we're going to do a forward, and we're going to do a price, and we're going to do a forward PE, and then we're going to do a forward EPS. And then we have our dividend yield, right? And then we have our MA50 is what we called it. And then we called it MA200 right here. And then I can delete that. All right, and then I'll do the MA200. And then let's make sure we can display everything in our database in one big table. If I do that, and there we go. We have a nice table with a whole bunch of data that we can use. So you can see Amazon's price is 1918. Yep, looks pretty good. All right, so now let's finish this application off by hooking up all these filters. So in our logic here, we are pulling in all of the records from the database if there's no filter set. So what we want to do is when you start entering data here, we want it to actually filter down this data set to only those that match specific parameters. And so we're going to do that by submitting this form by clicking filter. And so you see I click the filter button. It doesn't do anything yet. So I'm going to go back to my UI, and I'm going to have that filter button. All right. I'm going to have it submit the form. So I'm going to do, I think if I do type equals submit here, and then wrap this whole thing in a form. So I'm going to do form. Okay. And then I'm going to put this form tag at the end. And let's see how that goes. So if I submit that, you see how it puts that question mark there. That means it's going to submit a GET request, and we're going to submit a query string. So we mentioned in the first video that you can have FastAPI parse the query string, and that way we can bookmark these URLs and use them to send stock screener links to other people. So to do that, we actually need to name all of these inputs. So I'm going to do name equals forward PE, and I'm going to do name equals dividend yield, and I'm going to do name equals MA50, and I'm just giving these forms the same name as the fields in the database. So I'm going to do name equals MA200. Now if I do that, and then I type a value there, you'll see when it submits, we have this question mark forward P equals 3, dividend yield equals blank, and then if I check a box here, click it again, you'll see MA200 equals on. So whatever we submit in this form, the values get posted and appended to the URL, and we have this bookmarkable URL. So now what we need to do is have FastAPI parse out each of these query string parameters and then filter down our database results depending on what the values of these are. So let's do that. So in main.py, let's go back to home. And the way we actually have it parse those query parameters is in our function signature here. Let's actually put the names of those parameters and give them some defaults. So what I'm going to say is forward PE equals none. So if there's no forward PE, then we don't need to filter anything. So we give it a default value of none. And I'm going to say dividend yield equals none. And I'm also going to say MA50 equals none and MA200 equals none, right? And so by default, it's going to select all of the records. And then we're going to say if forward PE is not none, then we know we need to actually do a filter. That means we got that value as a query parameter, and then we need to filter our stocks. So we have stocks, we have all the records, but if forward PE is not none, we're going to find all of the stocks with a forward PE that's less than the forward PE that's in our parameter. So I'm going to say stocks equals stocks.filter and stock.forward PE less than forward PE, which is the one in the parameter or in the filter. So if I do that, I'm going to run that. Oop, we have an error so far. And let's see what that is. List object has no attribute filter. What that means is when we run .all here, it actually fetches them all from the database in advance. What we want to do is chain a bunch of filters together before returning the result. So I'm going to remove that .all so that we just have a query object here, and then we start doing the filters. So if I do that and then refresh the page, you'll see it showed all the stocks there. And let me try a value here of 10, and you see we found all the records, and we filtered down to the ones with a PE less than 10. If I do 20, you see more. If I do 30, you see more. So you see that filter is working. What we want to do for the user is to keep that number up here just for usability purposes. So I'll show you how to do that in a second. But you see that we have a working filter using these query parameters here in the query string. So we're successfully filtering the database. So now let's just hook up these other few. So for forward PE, the other one will work the same. We have dividend yield. So if dividend yield is not none, we can do stocks equals stocks.filter, stock.dividend yield is greater. So we care about ones that are greater than the dividend yield. So we'll do that. Okay. And then we can also say if MA50, we can find where stocks are above the 50-day moving average. So we'll do stocks.filter, stock.price is greater than stock.MA50. And then we can also do if MA200, we can say stocks equals stocks.filter, stock.price is greater than whatever its 200-day moving average is, greater than stock.MA200. So let's see if all of those work. All right. So I'm going to, do I have any errors? All right, so there's no errors, but I'm saying if is not none. But when I submit that, you see dividend yield equals like that. So that's actually sending an empty string, which is not none. So it's filtering and checking if it's greater than empty string. So that's not really what we want. So what I want is I'm just going to do if dividend yield and if forward PE. So I'm just going to do it like that. So if it's a none or an empty string, then it won't execute. But if it's any other value, then this will be interpreted as true, and we can execute this logic here. So I'm going to do if dividend yield. All right, so dividend yield is an empty string, and it can still run. And so now if I'm going to erase this, and I'm going to check if the ones where dividend yield is greater than 2. So I'll enter that, and you see we have stocks with a dividend yield greater than 2. And now let me try above the 50-day. I run that. You see Amazon is held up relatively well. It's above the 50-day. And then I click above the 200-day. And you see we also get Microsoft in that list. So we have all of our filters are now working. And now all we have to do to finish this off, polish off the UI by repopulating these values here. So I'm going to do that. So to do that, all we got to do is add these values that come in. Let's just add them back to let's return them back to the template. So I'm just going to say dividend yield is dividend yield, right? And then forward PE is forward PE. And then we're going to do MA200. Yeah, so we're just taking basically everything that comes in and sending them back to the template. So I'm going to do MA50, MA50. So they're going back to the template. And then as the default values for each of these, we're just going to display the variable. So I'm going to do value equals, and then we're just going to put the forward PE that comes from our function. We're just going to display it here. So I'm going to do value equals dividend yield, and then here in line, I can just say for a checkbox to make it checked, we can do if MA200, and then end if, and then inside of this we can say if that's true, then we can do checked equals checked, and then same thing for the 50-day here, we can do if MA50, then we can do checked equals checked. All right, so if we do that, run it again, you see that box is checked. If I do 10, the number stays, so we're persisting that value now. So stocks with forward PE less than 10, we got Corning and Altria Group. So now if I reload it, you see it has these none values in here. We don't want that. So if I reload it without any parameters, you see how this none value gets here. That's because the value is none. We don't want that string there, so what we can do is forward PE or empty string and dividend yield or empty string. All right, so that none will evaluate to false, and then we'll get the empty string. So let's try one more time. Let's filter down this list. Let's find the ones with forward PE less than 20 to filter it down some. Right, we filtered it down. Forward at PE is less than 20 for all these, and let's filter down the dividend yield. So let's find all the stocks with dividend yield greater than 4. So these are now the stocks with the forward PE less than 20, and the dividend yield is greater than 4. And then now if we do one final filter of the ones above the 50-day moving average, you see we don't get any. And so let's remove some of these requirements. You see that the only one above the 50-day moving average is Amazon. And if I do above the 200-day, you get Amazon and Microsoft. So yeah, that's it for our introduction to FastAPI. You see we've built a working application. We have a dashboard that shows a list of stocks from the database. We have a modal dialog in our UI that allows us to add multiple stock symbols and insert them into the database. And then we have a bunch of filters here in our UI that allow us to filter down this list of stocks to form a stock screener so we can find all the stocks that meet certain key statistics. We've covered a lot of the different functionality of FastAPI, including its ability to work with Jinja 2 templates. We are using the Y Finance, so we're using a third-party package. We're using background tasks in order to fetch information in the background. We're using dependency injection in order to get a database connection that we use in our endpoint. We're able to use the request object and SQL Alchemy. We're using Pedantic in order to validate our data types and requests automatically. And yeah, so we're just using tons of functionality. And so far I've been pretty impressed with FastAPI, and I hope to make some future applications with it and make some other tutorials on it. But that's it for the introduction to this. So stay tuned for some future videos, and we'll keep creating new projects and exploring new tools and technologies and financial stock applications. So thanks a lot for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.